On a good idea?
Yes, can I come for a ride? Ricky, will you be taking punters as well as staff?
Yeah. To be fair, we hadn't really appreciated the amount of love we've had from Paihia people saying, hey, an extra hour we'd stay and have another wine and enjoy it. So it's good. So we're taking New Zealand anytime.
Oh, look, that sounds like a great one. Thank you very much for joining us. Ricky Kinnaird there, co-owner of the Duke of Marlborough, on the panel. We've also been speaking with Raj Chakraborty, novelist, short story writer, and also Julie Woods has been in with us, ambassador for Blind Low Vision New Zealand. I'm Susie Ferguson. Have a cracking weekend.
Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. Thousands march for action on climate change while others are shoveling mud from their flood-ruined homes, waiting to hear what happens next. Muriwai residents still have plenty of questions but few answers despite meeting with officials. We talked to an environmental engineer who reckons it is never too soon to talk about retreating in the face of Mother Nature. Could good news be just around the bend for Auckland residents cut off by slips and monster potholes? Auckland Transport is live. The heartbreak of a rotten Kumara harvest. We talked to a grower. And does anyone want to buy a season pass to a couple of ski fields on the financial ropes? Don't forget, you can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook, Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. Thousands of protesters demanding climate action, along with a lower voting age, e-bike rebates and worker protections, have taken to the streets in cities and towns throughout New Zealand. The biggest turnout for the School Strike for Climate was expected in Auckland, where the route went from Britomart Station to Victoria Park, with a concert continuing until 7 o'clock tonight. In Wellington, the chanting crowd swelled to more than 1,000 people as they made their way down Lambton Quay to Parliament, drawing spontaneous applause from some office workers and shoppers. In Christchurch, about 500 people braved steady rain to join the protest at the council buildings. Addressing the crowd at the Auckland March, the co-president of Unite Union, Xavier Walsh, has said the government has failed to deliver the radical change needed to tackle the climate crisis.
Plans by the opposition, such as to reopen deep-sea oil drilling, would make the situation even worse. Then I say shame. So I say to both the Labour and National parties, I can smell the fossil fuels on your breath.
Xavier Walsh says real change will only come from ordinary people standing together and refusing to accept injustice. One of the organisers of the Wellington Climate March says successive governments have failed to make the radical change needed to save the planet from disaster. Speaking after the march to Parliament, Te Umanako Wā says the horrific weather events of the last few weeks should be a wake-up call for those in authority.
I feel like the facts are in their face. The students, the people, everyone is telling them what needs to be done. If the response for COVID can happen this quick, surely the response for a worldwide disaster, a natural breakdown, can happen too. It's really important that we hold our leaders to account.
Te Umanako Wā says it's time for politicians to take notice of what their citizens are telling them. The Prime Minister is promising further clarity on the government's position on the lowering of the voting age. The Supreme Court last year declared the voting age of 18 was inconsistent with the Bill of Rights Act. Lowering the voting age would require a three-quarter majority in Parliament to pass. Chris Hipkins says the government is considering how it responds to that ruling.
You should expect to see some further clarity from the Cabinet on the government's intentions on that in the next little while.
Young people protesting outside Parliament this afternoon for immediate climate change action called for the voting age to be lowered. National's health spokesperson says the government needs to be clear on allegations that hundreds of Te Whatu Ora staff are set to be laid off. Ousted Te Whatu Ora chair Rob Campbell says there is a plan to shift resources from bureaucracy to the front line, which means managerial and administrative roles could be reallocated or cut. Dr Shane Reti says the government needs to be clear on what health jobs are at risk, how many and in what regions.
It's a very fine line. It takes time. It takes great sensitivity to make those sort of changes. And you've got to be clear exactly what it is that you're removing. For example, if you decide you'll remove payroll and reduce payroll services, then you're going to find out the first payroll round that doesn't go through. You've made a very bad choice.
The Prime Minister did not want to discuss the substance of Rob Campbell's claims, saying Mr Campbell can say what he likes now he's a private citizen. The head of Britain's Domestic Intelligence Service has made an unprecedented public apology for MI5's failure to prevent a terrorist attack in Manchester in 2017. A report has found the suicide attack that killed 22 people at a pop concert might have been avoided if intelligence officers had acted more promptly on information they received. The report says MI5 had concerns about the bomber, Salman Abedi, but these were not discussed or immediately written up. The families of some of the victims have reacted to the failure with anger. It's 5:04. Multiple cars were ablaze in a large building fire in the Hamilton suburb of Frankton. Fire and Emergency says the fire was contained by crews at 3:30 this afternoon and is now being damped down. Reportedly, the fire is at a car parts workshop. In sport, Australian golfer Chris Wood has had another good day at the New Zealand Open in Queenstown. Wood opened a 4-shot lead after the opening round and is the clubhouse leader after a second round 69. The Breakers are aiming to dethrone the Sydney Kings in the Australian NBL Championship. Former NBL player and coach Shane Heal is backing the Breakers to take the early advantage in the best-of-5 final series, which tips off in Sydney tonight.
The Breakers, they're 11-3 on the road. They're not scared of going on the road. And what they bring is they bring a whole lot of offence, but their defence and their mobility and toughness is going to trouble the Kings.
Shane Heal talking on the basketball show. Game 1 tips off at 9:30. The Crusaders have been boosted by the return of veteran All Blacks forward Sam Whitelock as they look to bounce back from their season-opening upset loss to the Chiefs. Whitelock is back in the lineup for tonight's clash with the Highlanders in Melbourne after missing last week's defeat with a head injury. Coach Scott Robertson says Whitelock's presence will lift the side.
14 years experience and just a good fall for us. We just know how important he is to us and how experienced, and he's just having him back around the group.
The game kicks off at 8 o'clock with all teams playing in Melbourne this weekend. And 6 off-season signings will make their first National Rugby League appearances for the Warriors in their season opener against Newcastle in Wellington tonight. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, Bessel van der Kolk on his best-selling book about trauma and how Western medicine is failing to deal with it. Ex-Mint chick Ruben Nielsen's Unknown Mortal Orchestra has a new album, and Helen Lestadius on the Sami people, and Timnit Gebru, the activist trying to keep artificial intelligence ethical. Kolkin Hillaho, join me tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
A network funded through New Zealand On Air. Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next up. That's after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight on Saturday. Northland to Waitomo, including the Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Partly cloudy, isolated showers this afternoon in Northland. Taranaki to Vanuatu, including the Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine, apart from scattered afternoon and evening showers, possible thunderstorms. Wairarapa, fine today, periods of rain developing in the morning, easing in the evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy periods, rain develops tonight, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, clearing to fine from the south tonight. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered showers about Canterbury, spreading elsewhere this afternoon, some heavy with possible thunderstorms until tonight. Showers turning to rain in Canterbury tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, scattered showers spreading north this afternoon and evening, some may be heavy tomorrow afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, light showers are possible. It's 5:07.
Kia ora rā e ho. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Coming up, thousands march for climate change across the country, but we begin on Auckland's west coast, where tonight's Muriwai residents are still waiting for answers after a community meeting left them with very few. There are now 128 red-stickered properties with an additional 48 yellow-stickered. And while most people want to know when they can re-enter their homes, questions about the long-term effects on their property values are also looming. Tom Taylor and Nick Munro have this report.
If you have a red placard, you should have received a letter from us. Okay.
Muriwai residents letting their exasperation show at what many of them feel has been a failure of communication by Auckland Council. A community meeting at the Muriwai Golf Club last night interrupted variously by laughter or jeering when representatives from the council couldn't provide the answers these residents were looking for.
Tell us how long we're going to be homeless for.
I can't tell you that.
That's not good enough. You have all the technology. You kicked us out of our homes without giving us an answer, and we're all homeless.
Most importantly, when they might be able to re-enter their homes. The message from council, a cry for more patience.
As yet, we still do not understand enough about that slope to start putting folk into that area. Okay, it's as simple as that.
Residents were also angry there was no geotech expert at the meeting, but Auckland Council Building Consents Manager Ian McCormick was. He says based on the latest surveying, some properties in the area may have their placards moved down a level, from red to yellow or yellow to white. But that's little consolation for the owners of 75 properties on the slip-ridden Domain Crescent that still haven't undergone initial assessments.
We haven't individually assessed each individual building there because it's been too dangerous to do it. In fact, even our FENS team had to withdraw from there, and that was the last time we were up there.
Mr McCormick says when assessments can take place, these properties are likely to be red-stickered too. Jane Scott's home falls into this category. After the meeting, she said the more than an hour drive from her temporary accommodation wasn't worth it.
Well, I thought that was an absolute waste of time. We just need answers as to when we can go back and when we can access my car. My car's still there. When I'm going to get red-stickered, I'm in Domain Crescent. And I just felt like they didn't tell us anything, really. They didn't even have a geotech engineer here to tell us what the situation is with the cliff.
Although Auckland Council representatives spoke for about 3/4 of an hour, Ms Scott came out with a long list of questions left unanswered. The most pressing of these questions, when can she get back inside her home?
Is it weeks? Is it months? Is it weeks? Is it months? Is it years? Is it never? Can we never go back in?
Ms Scott's neighbour, Mary Ann Patterson, says the future of her home and way of life have been left up in the air.
I've been coming here all my life, and I love Muriwai, but I'm not so sure now about whether I want to go back to my home. I feel in danger.
Brent Ritchie hasn't been able to access his home at all since the cyclone. He knows it's been red-stickered in a rapid building assessment, but he's seen no photos or evidence of damage or risk. What he has received is a letter from council saying this sticker will show up on his property's land information memorandum, possibly affecting its value well into the future.
It's a little bit unfair to send us a letter tagging our properties saying that this will appear on your limbs forever when it was a 20-minute assessment. So I think they need to back up, the council need to back up and do proper evaluations and then discuss that with landowners and before there's a final decision or any list created about that.
Mr Ritchie expects his red sticker will be downgraded and says it would be wrong to mark the property's permanent record based on its initial rapid assessment.
I think that's premature and inappropriate because, as they mentioned tonight, they haven't assessed every property individually. So I think there's been a breakdown of communication in council, or maybe they're being jumping the gun on that.
Let them get on with it. Ask a question.
Auckland Council Director of Regulatory Services, Craig Hobbs, says he understands residents' frustration. He says there's scope to reassess and change coloured stickers where appropriate.
It was done in a hurry. If we believe we've got it wrong, we'll reassess and we can downgrade.
But without a change in legislation, the council says it's bound to include the initial assessments on the LIM reports. Mr Hobbs says on Wednesday there'll be another opportunity for people to drop in and discuss their individual properties with experts. But this still won't be able to provide answers for those with homes in the most at-risk zone.
It'll be where we've actually assessed the property, giving people some idea of the situation that their property's in and where to from here. If it's the likes of Domain Crescent where we haven't been able to get in to assess, to be honest, we can't tell them anything because we don't know.
Perhaps time will tell, but for these displaced Muriwai residents, patience is wearing thin.
And if you're listening to us this evening and you want to watch that story from Nick and Tom, you can watch it on our Checkpoint Facebook or Instagram pages. It's got some incredible drone footage showing the extent of the slips there. More than 30 Auckland roads are still closed following back-to-back extreme weather events, including the anniversary weekend floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. That's down from a peak of 120 roads closed and 1,300 slips around the region. The isolated beach settlement of Karikari is still cut off after significant landslides that saw houses swept away and the power off for days. Other West Auckland roads have suffered significant damage, with almost all waiting on geotech assessments. Well, joining us now is Auckland Transport Chief Engineer Murray Burt. Kia ora, Murray. I understand you've been at Karikari. What do the roads look like there?
Kia ora. Yes, I'm calling actually from Karikari, and we've completed geotechnical assessments of the roads this week, and I've been out there with the contractor looking at doing upgrades and improvements so that we can open the road for residents, officially open it very, very shortly. So the slips are quite horrendous in some sections of the road, and there will be parts of Lone Kauri Road which we'll have to keep closed, but we'll be able to open at least Karikari Road for residents' access in the coming weeks.
Both lanes or a single lane access?
So it will be single lane access through these tight spots. There's at least 15 slip sites, major slips through Lone Kauri and Karikari. So it will be quite constrained access, but it will be able to be officially opened for the residents down there.
And what's a few weeks exactly, Murray?
So walking over with the contractor today, definitely within 2 weeks we'll have the basic works done, the signage in place and everything to be opened, but we're optimistic that it will be able to be completed before that.
So a maximum of 2 weeks, but hopefully sooner.
Yes, exactly.
You say officially opening the road. Does that mean people are still driving it right now?
So I've been through today. There's sections that is really pedestrian access only, and there's other sections that are trafficable by vehicles, but we're definitely not recommending that anybody traverses there. And at the moment, residents are receiving helicopter drops from Auckland Emergency Management of lifeline supplies.
Okay, so that fix that you're talking about, which is 2 weeks away, that's not the whole story, right? So what else is going on with opening up access there, clearing all the roads?
Yeah, so what we'll be able to do immediately is what we call minimum viable levels of service to reopen a lifeline access route. Obviously, to restore the road to its original condition is a major job. That will require a lot more geotechnical investigation, design work for building retaining walls and other security measures to secure the slopes. And that will definitely be months' worth of work. And the number of slips that are down in Lone Kauri and Karikari Road, it could even be more than a year before we get things back to the way that they were.
More than a year?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the slips I've had a look at today, you would have to secure the first one before you could move on to working on the second one. So it will be a progressive piece of work, and it's a significant amount of work to reopen those two roads to full two-lane access.
Murray, have you got an idea of how many people are sort of trapped living there at the moment?
I don't have the exact figures, but I believe that there's around 25 households at least, maybe more. I think Auckland Emergency Management is holding the details of exactly how many people are still living in that area.
Sure. So you've got the geotech report back to do this initial work. So what is that telling you? Are things still moving?
So with the, how do I explain? We've installed some monitoring stations to detect movement, and with the better weather over recent days and weeks, the sites seem to be stable at the moment, but we'll reassess after any additional rainfall that we have to see if there's been any change, and that could also change the status of the road and its opening at any point.
So you are warning, really, aren't you, that despite the fact your ambitions are to open this within 2 weeks, that it could close at the drop of a hat if something starts moving again?
Yeah, exactly. We don't know what happens when a major weather event comes through, and so we'd have to reassess at that point. And I guess the clear message is for all the communities of Karikari, Piha, Muriwai, that general public should stay away. and that things are still very delicate, and really it's for residents only in these areas at this point in time.
Well, given that these are temporary repairs and you're still asking people to stay away, and you've told us big picture, more than a year potentially to do the full fix, are people going to be told to stay away? Members of the public who don't live there, could they be, well, in essence, banned from some of these West Coast settlements for more than a year?
I think definitely there's beach areas that will be open for general public access where we can. Some of these more sensitive areas like Karekare will just have to be monitored on a day-by-day, week-by-week basis. The aim of Auckland Transport is always to open up for public access for everyone, and that will be what we'll be aiming at doing as quickly as physically possible.
Just looking at your website and not taking away anything from the fact that you've got down from 120 road closures to just over 30, right? And you were facing 1,300 slips, no mean feat, absolutely. But on that list of still closed roads, everything seems to have next to it waiting on geotech assessment. Are there enough skills in this area and resources for these assessments to be done, or is there a backlog and you've got to be in a queue to have an assessment of each individual road?
So there's an element that full geotech assessments can't be done until the sites are stabilised, and we've been waiting a little for things to stabilise. We're now moving ahead very rapidly with geotechnical assessments on all of the sites, and the results are coming in on a daily basis. And as those results come in, we're able to update on the website. So definitely for Lone Kauri and Karekare, we'll be able to make those updates imminently and change that status.
Murray, I did notice one change on the website, Scenic Drive. This is the slip being called Elevation Slip. What's the deal with that road?
So Elevation Slip has been a pinch point for the Piha community, and we've done a lot of work to reopen single lane access there. I'm actually very close to Elevation Slip right now, and the aim is that we open that up for single lane running at some point this evening, and they're installing the traffic lights now, so I think that they should be opening imminently this evening, which will allow at least light traffic, anything less than 3.5 tonnes, to be able to traverse through Elevation in a single lane operation.
And is that reserved for residents basically as well, or any car can go through?
At this point, I believe that we'll be opening it for general traffic. However, I think final decisions are still being made in conjunction with Auckland Emergency Management and in consultation with the communities in this area.
Appreciate your time, Murray. Thank you very much for joining us. That's Murray Burke, Chief Engineer at Auckland Transport there. Timeline really for Karekare and that slip on Scenic Drive, Elevation Slip, around about 6 o'clock is when they think they'll be open with one lane. And you will probably be aware of the climate change marches around the country, speaking of traffic, and we'll have more on the actual marches later in the program. But in Auckland, the climate march is ending at Victoria Park, where there's a concert until 7 this evening. And Auckland Transport is warning there will likely be a mix of road closures, one-way and full closures, as the march moves over certain streets in the city, getting towards Victoria Park along Customs Street and Fanshawe Street. So be aware of that, and there'll be rolling closures as the march moves through different intersections. That's from now until 6, but I understand the marches are kind of running a little bit behind schedule. So be aware of that. Auckland's downtown major streets temporarily closed are Fanshawe Street, including the on-ramp to the Harbour Bridge, Halsey and Beaumont Streets. And that creates an issue with the buses, obviously. So all buses that leave from the downtown area, Auckland Transport says they have been redirected to bus stops further up in the CBD. So bottom line, check the website or your app to make sure which roads are closed and where your bus is going from. 22 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai, you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai or Whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard this evening on the road closures, what's happening out at Karekare, Muriwai, and if you've been on the march today, we'd love to hear from you too. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. The email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Karen is standing by with the headlines. Ko Karen anō tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. Thousands of people have marched in different parts of the country today as part of the latest school strike for climate. The biggest turnout expected in Auckland, with a concert in Victoria Park continuing until 7 o'clock tonight. In Wellington, more than 1,000 people marched to Parliament, while hundreds of protesters also gathered in Christchurch and Nelson. They're demanding climate action, along with a lower voting age, e-bike rebates and worker protections. The Prime Minister admits the government has more work to do on reducing climate change, but says it's on the right track. Chris Hipkins says recent flooding events have underscored the importance of reducing human-induced climate change and developing resilience to its effects. More than 30 Auckland roads remain closed, as you've just been hearing, following the anniversary weekend floods and Cyclone Gabrielle. Auckland Transport Chief Engineer Murray Burt told Checkpoint some roads could take more than a year before they are fully repaired. But he says the main road into the isolated beach settlement of Karikari should be open within 2 weeks, as long as there's no adverse weather. Coroners have been using DNA samples to identify the victims of Wednesday's train crash in Greece. The number of people confirmed dead has risen to 57. And administrators for the company that runs the ski slopes of Mount Ruapehu have announced winter season ski passes will go on sale soon. Administrator John Fisk says he's confident the season will go smoothly. Ruapehu Alpine Lifts went into voluntary administration in October. On the traffic front in Wellington, a crash prior to the Ngāronga Gorge flyover on State Highway 1, the urban motorway, closed 2 right lanes earlier this afternoon with long queues back to the Terrace Tunnel and the Tinakori on-ramp. Congestion has now eased with both right lanes now open, but Waka Kotahi says it is back to normal peak time traffic flow, so perhaps still some delays. In the Bay of Plenty, both northbound lanes on State Highway 2 past the Pangaroa roundabout are closed due to a truck roll. Long delays reported there. In Northland, a crash on State Highway 12 at Ruapehu has blocked lanes near Green Hill Road south of Dargaville. Drivers warned to expect delays. And on the Coromandel Peninsula, a crash at Totara Valley near Thames this afternoon has also been causing long delays. And as you heard from Lisa, rolling closures to roads in downtown Auckland this afternoon, including Fanshawe Street, Halsey Street, Beaumont Street and the on-ramp to the Harbour Bridge as a climate change march wends its way through the downtown area. We'll have more news headlines and any traffic updates for you around 5:40.
Ngā mihi, Karen. The New Zealand Breakers are 3 wins away from their 5th Australian National Basketball League title. A year ago, the club was at its lowest point, but a change in coach and a focus on recruiting New Zealand players has put them in a position to challenge the top side in the league for the silverware. The Breakers are the underdogs against the defending champions, Kings, though the experts are picking an upset when the series tips off in Sydney tonight. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. It's been a long time since the Breakers were in a final series. What can we expect from them?
It has been a long time. They last won the last of their 4 titles came in 2015, and they were last in a final series in 2016. So a lot has changed in the NBL since then. Those were won during best of 3 series, and now they're into a best of 5 series. So
what are they trying to do? Torture us?
Well, exactly. Tom Abercrombie, the captain of the Breakers, was the only player that was around during those last championship winning times, and he sort of says it is a little bit different going into a best of 5. It's the strategy or the tactics of a best of 3 it's quite a grueling, quick turnaround in these series, and so to have to go to a best of 5, it makes it a little bit more difficult for them as well. And as the Kings, because they were the top side, they've actually got home advantage for this series. So tonight it'll be in Sydney, then it comes back to Auckland on Sunday, and then it goes back to Sydney if we could potentially have a winner at that point as well. So it's a little bit of crossing of the Tasman again, not sometimes as far as what the Breakers have had to do in previous years, go all the way up to Perth, but it's a little bit different there. And the Kings and the Breakers have met 3 times this season, and each time it has been the away team that has won. So that's good for the Breakers, right? If they don't have home advantage.
Well, it's good for them tonight.
Yeah. I don't know. When it works its way out, it maybe should be good for them. And we'll just see as competition between different styles here. As the Kings play quite a high tempo game, whereas the Breakers don't really. So it'll be an interesting matchup across those games as well, across the series, to figure out once each team gets a little bit of a guide on each other. Because the Kings do have the league MVP, Xavier Cooks. He's a dominant force at both ends of the floor and is on the radar for NBA teams already. So he's somebody to look out for. And with all of that talent, though, he did tell the media today, before big games kind of like this one, he throws up. So somebody with all of this,
Oh, no, I feel like someone needs to give him a hug.
Well, let's not, because we're not too worried if he's a little bit sick, right?
Okay. We'll be, no more need to be said. Now, the Breakers, they aren't the only New Zealand team with important games in the Trans-Tasman, competitions this weekend. Tell us more.
No, so Super Rugby round goes to Melbourne. So this is the second time that they've had the so-called Super Round. So it's all 12 teams playing in Melbourne. Last year, one team didn't get to play because of COVID and the restrictions. So it's the first time that it's been properly held like this. But the Crusaders and the Highlanders, so the traditional Southern Derby, kicks it off over there at 8 o'clock tonight, which is a little bit of a different one, I guess, for the South Island fans to be watching both of their teams so far away. But also, rugby's a bit of a hard sell in Melbourne. It's not a city that's a big fan of rugby. They're a more AFL city.
Yeah.
It's a couple of weeks before the AFL season first bounced there. So they're hoping to bring in some more of that entertainment and that music and those types of things that they sort of put around an event like this to hopefully drag in some of that Melbourne crowd. But also, the Warriors kick off their NRL season tonight. They're in Wellington. They're playing the Newcastle Knights. That's again a kick-off at 8 o'clock. And, new coach Andrew Webster has given 7 new players, or 7 off-season signings, an opportunity to start tonight. Again, they have quite a good record against the Knights. The Knights have only won 2 of the last 14 games they've played in New Zealand. So that's quite a good one for the Warriors fans who wonder again, maybe this is their year.
We will see. So lots of reasons for sports fans to say cemented to the couch this weekend. Thank you, Felicity. Felicity Reid there with sport. From the flood zone to the red zone, the Prime Minister Chris Hipkins today announced an additional $301 million boost for the rebuild of earthquake-damaged Christchurch schools and said the program in Christchurch may be a template for repairing flood-damaged schools in the North Island. And if you're wondering if you heard that right, yep, there are some schools in Christchurch still waiting to be repaired more than a decade after the devastating quakes. On his first visit to Christchurch since becoming Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins visited one of the schools still in the midst of its rebuild process. And to celebrate the progress being made, our reporter Rachel Graham and videographer Nate McKinnon went along.
81 schools across Christchurch have now had rebuild or refurbishment work completed since the Christchurch School Rebuild Program was started in 2013. But 27 are still in the midst of the process, and 2 are yet to even start. Heaton Intermediate School is one of the schools midway through the process. But today they celebrated the opening of the first set of new classrooms, with Prime Minister Chris Hipkins doing the ribbon-cutting honours. Mr Hipkins also announced that the government would make what he hopes is a final increase in funding of $301 million, bringing the total spend on the Christchurch School Rebuild Program to $1.6 billion. He said the lessons from Christchurch's post-quake experience will be useful when dealing with the flood-damaged schools.
There's been some significant damage to some of the schools, and so we will be able to draw on the lessons from the Christchurch experience and making sure that we're getting those schools back up and running as quickly as possible, first and foremost, but then also rebuilding so that they're resilient and sustainable and providing the kind of learning environment that we want them to have in the future.
Following the Christchurch earthquake, the government initially said it would close 13 schools and merge 18. In the end, 9 schools were closed and 15 schools merged. Chris Hipkins says they will learn from the mistakes as well.
I certainly think some of those very early lessons about the damage that can be done to community cohesion when you try and push through an amalgamation process right in the heart of sort of an emergency response. We certainly wouldn't be trying that in any other part of the country.
Mr Hipkins was taken on a tour of the new buildings by Heaton Intermediate Principal James Griggs. Mr Griggs says after 10 years in earthquake-damaged classrooms, it is great to be in state-of-the-art rooms.
Classrooms that are warm, dry, healthy, acoustically sound, where lighting has been considered, where oxygen levels have been considered, when all of those things are considered in a classroom, and also just having a more pleasant learning environment. I mean, it's going to make a huge difference for our students.
Chris Hipkins also made time to visit the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch, one of the two sites which were the centre of the terrorist attacks on March 15th 4 years ago. Mr Hipkins says this was his first chance to meet with the community since he became Prime Minister.
It's clearly a community that has a real interest in a particular program of work that the government's undertaking, which is the recommendations arising from the Royal Commission into March 15. And so I imagine that they want to share with me some views that they've got about how we're doing, and I want to hear from them how they think we're doing, and hear directly their feedback on that.
Chris Hipkins says, in part, he wants to reassure the Muslim community in Christchurch that although there has been a change of Prime Minister, the government's commitment to the community has not changed.
It is 27 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa I nai ko Nona Peltier. Nona joins us in the studio. Consumer confidence, it's fallen again. What numbers have you got? Whose are they?
Yeah, this is the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Survey. We get it every month. So this time around, 100 being sort of anything above being kind of positive, anything below not so much. We're at 79.8 points. That's pretty much the lowest level since 2008, which is pretty low. That's in terms of the way that people feel about their own financial position. So that's a pretty negative outlook. And while a lot of people don't think it's a good time to buy a major appliance or, some kind of thing, they're still spending their money, but they're getting a whole lot less for it. And it's starting to wear, I guess, on consumers. So there's some implications there for the broader economy. One of the things that's interesting is that while we still have a tight labour market, consumers still have jobs, it's less likely that they're going to panic, but that could change with forecast unemployment rising according to the Reserve Bank over time. So we'll see what happens there.
This next story will be of interest to possibly thousands of people who have lost vehicles in the floods. Bad weather, broken transport links. Well, it's hit the new car market. What's the latest?
Yeah, so the latest number of vehicles registered last month, so that was the month when we had all those terrible disruptions from weather. They fell 24%. That's the lowest month of February since 2014. They say that that's partly because of the disruption, because they couldn't get vehicles where they needed to go, but also the cost of them. People are concerned about rising interest rates, home mortgages, so forth, so they're buying fewer cars as well. It affected, just all kinds of vehicles, whether they're customer, passenger vehicles, as well as commercial vehicles too. Now, they do think that these numbers will pick up as people start to replace their vehicles. But because of the costs involved and the rising inflation and so on, they may not be replacing those vehicles with new ones. So it remains to be seen. There's a big question mark hanging over that one as well.
Yeah, interesting. And what do you have from the markets, please, Nona?
Well, I just wanted to say just this afternoon that push pay takeover that we've been talking about.
The saga rolls on.
Saga, it's over. Okay. It's over, and it was defeated. The takeover was rejected by shareholders. It failed to meet the mark. So even though the shareholders who wanted to sell, 100% of them said, yes, please. The others said, not so much. And I think the number was, at the end of the day, about 55% only supported it. They needed 75%, so it didn't meet the threshold. Anyways, the push pay share price dropped more than 3% to $1.23, which is below now the offer price, which was, I think it was $1.34. Anyhow, the NZX Top 50, it fell 0.25%. It was not so bad until, of course, after that. That was a 32-point drop to 11,869. The New Zealand dollar trading at 62.2 US cents. And again, this is because the U.S. Federal Reserve is signaling that they're going to continue to raise interest rates. 92.3 Australian, 52 British pence. And that's
52 British pence.
There you are.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier with business news there. Vanuatu is currently being lashed by its second cyclone in the space of 2 days. Cyclone Kevin is currently a Category 3 system with winds gusting up to 185 kilometres per hour. It's on a path to hit Vanuatu's already severely hit southern province, Tawhia, by tomorrow morning at almost Category 4 strength, which could see winds reaching over 200 kilometres an hour. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
One cyclone down, an earthquake in between, and now Category 3 cyclone Kevin is battering the Pacific Island nation. Prime Minister Ismail Kalasakau declared a state of emergency for areas in Vanuatu impacted by severe tropical cyclone Judy. Mr Kalasakau says the Council of Ministers met yesterday where he approved the request by the National Disaster Committee.
I'm pleased to announce that the Council of Ministers has met this afternoon and it has approved a request from the National Disaster Committee to ask the President of the Republic of Vanuatu to declare a state of emergency for the islands that have been highly affected and impacted by Tropical Cyclone Judy, effective this evening.
This morning, Port Vila journalist Dan McGarry says the country's second biggest city, Luganville, was feeling the impact of Kevin. He says the longer it takes to reach Port Vila, the worse it will be for the country's capital.
There's anticipation that a lot of the debris that was knocked to the ground by Cyclone Judy will be picked up again and thrown around. So we're anticipating a little bit of additional danger from today's cyclone.
Mr McGarry says Cyclone Judy has caused widespread but moderate damage and there has been no news of injuries. Chief of Vanuatu's UNICEF office, Eric Dupere, says about half the population has been affected.
What we can see around is that 3 branch roofs have been destroyed. I just got a report that the newborn room in the Vanuatu Central Hospital, the roof has slid away, and that's the type of things we have reported.
Mr Dupere says gardens were destroyed and the country's food security was at risk. He says Cyclone Judy left some of the northern islands largely unaffected, which could have assisted the rest of the country with food supplies.
But if the second cyclone is also destroying garden and agriculture in other islands, it will be a real challenge in the coming weeks and months.
The country director for World Vision Vanuatu, Kendra Deriso, says the country will definitely be seeking international help.
Given the damage that I can see here in Port Vila and the fact that another cyclone is coming, I anticipate that they will be calling on their government partners as well for additional relief. And World Vision Vanuatu will also be working with the Australian and New Zealand governments to secure funding.
Meanwhile, the southern islands, Tana and Iramango, which are expected to be worse hit by Judy, remain unreachable. Aucklander Greg Watt, who used to split his time between Tana and New Zealand, is feeling anxious about the situation.
Given that Judy was a direct hit on Tana, and it looks like Kevin is also going to be a direct hit on Tana, it's not looking great.
However, Mr McGarry says the people of Vanuatu have been through bigger cyclones in the past and will get through this one. But it doesn't mean it's easy.
The people of Vanuatu are very, very resilient. We are the most disaster-prone country in the world, according to the World Bank, and we're living up to our reputation this year.
The National Disaster Office has indicated no assessments of damage will be undertaken until Cyclone Kevin has gone. But the government has already requested France to provide military aircraft for reconnaissance.
Caleb Fotheringham reporting there. It is 19 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we love to hear from you, so do send us your feedback. If you're on the Climate March, we'd love to hear about that experience, why you are marching. Also, get in touch if you're from Muriwai and you were at that meeting. Let us know your concerns, 2101 on text. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to Karen and the headlines. Anea Karen, mina pita pita kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. The Prime Minister says the government will learn from mistakes in the program to repair earthquake-damaged schools in Christchurch when looking at what to do with flood-damaged schools. Chris Hipkins today announced the fund to rebuild earthquake-damaged schools in Christchurch will get an additional $301 million, taking the total to $1.6 billion. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is also promising further clarity on the government's position on the lowering of the voting age. Young people protesting outside Parliament today for climate action also called for the voting age to be lowered. Chris Hipkins says Cabinet is considering the issue. Ousted health boss Rob Campbell, who was sacked as chair of Te Whatu Ora earlier this week, has been speaking out about his frustrations working within the agency. Rob Campbell told Checkpoint there's extensive waste in the system, but he says there is a plan to shift resources from bureaucracy to the front line. Greens co-leader James Shaw says Labour must commit to introducing tougher climate change policy if it wants his party's support to form a government after the election. Mr Shaw, who spoke at this afternoon's school strike for climate protest in Wellington, says Labour shouldn't take the Green Party's support for granted. And just a hand, school strike for climate protesters in Christchurch have breached the doors of the Christchurch Council buildings and are staging a sit-in. On the traffic front, disruptions and delays to downtown traffic in Auckland this afternoon due to the March for Climate Change Action, which is travelling from Britomart to Victoria Park. There are rolling closures to roads along the route, including Fanshawe Street, Halsey and Beaumont Streets. And Harbour Bridge traffic is being affected with the Fanshawe Street southbound off-ramp closed. The suggested detour is the Cook Street off-ramp for motorists travelling south. In Wellington, an earlier crash which closed 2 lanes on the Naurunga Gorge flyover on State Highway 1 is now clear with the lanes back open. Congestion is back to normal peak time Friday afternoon traffic flows. State Highway 12 at Ruapehu, lanes blocked near Greenhill Road due to a crash. And in the Bay of Plenty, a rolled truck has closed both northbound lanes on State Highway 2 past the Pangaroa roundabout. Emergency services are believed to be still at the scene. And a serious crash closed State Highway 25 at Totara Valley Road in Thames earlier this afternoon. It's now open again, but under stop-go traffic management. Expect delays. We'll have all the latest news at 6.
Thank you, Karen. Ousted health boss Rob Campbell says plans to trim waste and bureaucracy in Te Whatu Ora will need to be sped up, and it will involve reallocating or cutting hundreds of jobs. Mr Campbell was sacked as chair of the health agency earlier this week over concerns he couldn't be politically neutral. But now he's out and he says he's free to speak his mind on the changes the health behemoth urgently needs. Political reporter Giles Dexter has more.
Rob Campbell was never going to go quietly. His departure from Te Whatu Ora hasn't stopped him from speaking out, it's freed him up to speak out more. And he makes no bones about his frustrations at Te Whatu Ora's slow march to progress.
Dealing with a bureaucratic machine like health, it's been hard to get it moving anything like as quickly as it should be, and that was hard for me to speak out on when I was in the role. Now I'm not in the role, I can be much more direct about it.
Campbell says there is extensive waste and bureaucracy in the system, some of which has been brought over from the old DHBs, but also because of duplication when the DHBs were merged into Te Whatu Ora. He suggests some of the duplicated jobs could be shifted to the front line, which would address critical shortages and shift hundreds of millions of dollars away from overheads towards primary care. And it needs to start now.
Either people will be able to shift to more useful jobs that are not duplicated jobs, or some people undoubtedly will lose their jobs, and those resources will be applied in the front line where they're desperately needed.
The Prime Minister doesn't want to discuss the substance of the claims.
He's entitled to express and say whatever he wants to say now as a private citizen. But what I would say is that his departure from the 2 roles that he has left in the last 48 hours was nothing to do with policy and everything to do with what's the appropriate level of conduct for someone who's holding a position in which they're expected to be politically impartial.
But National's health spokesperson Dr Shane Reti says the government will need to be clear on exactly what jobs are at risk, how many and in what regions.
It's a very fine line. It takes time. It takes great sensitivity to make those sort of changes. And you've got to be clear exactly what it is that you're removing. For example, if you decide you'll remove payroll, and reduce payroll services, then you're going to find out the first payroll round that doesn't go through. You've made a very bad choice.
Former Association of Salaried Medical Specialists boss Ian Powell says he's agreed with Rob Campbell on many things, but this is too simplistic. He says administrative and managerial positions are a small proportion of the workforce, but squeezing them will just put more pressure on clinical staff. He believes the wastage isn't in the positions, but the processes.
The people who know how to improve the health system the best and to make it more efficient are the doctors and the nurses and the other professional staff who actually work in the system. And that's where the savings can be made, by engaging them more in decision making.
In a statement, Te Whatu Ora Chief Executive Margie Apa says over the course of 2023, Te Whatu Ora will continue to unify, simplify and integrate its team of teams. But any proposals are not yet finalised.
Giles Dexter reporting there. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tunu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it's not too early to talk about retreating instead of rebuilding after Cyclone Gabrielle, according to an environmental engineer who helped move an entire Australian town to higher ground after catastrophic flooding. More than a dozen people died when a metres-high wall of water flooded Grantham, west of Brisbane, in 2011. A swift decision was made to up sticks and essentially move it up a hill with the help of government and council funding. The rebuild was complete within a year. Here, people living in the West Auckland beach settlement of Muriwai are facing an uncertain future, with many homes red stickered, and it's the same for flood victims in Esk Valley and other areas in Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti. Environmental engineer Jamie Simmons was project director for the Grantham move. He's in Aotearoa right now and reckons the retreat conversation needs to start sooner rather than later.
Look, I think, in my experience, people need to start thinking about it pretty early on. When people get hit by a disaster, and certainly in the case of Grantham in Australia, they're really hopeful for answers quickly. And you have a fairly short window of opportunity with those people to pull them together and help them out. So I think, although you need to focus on the recovery efforts, of course, early on, and the response, having those conversations early, particularly internal to maybe councils or government, having those discussions, figuring out a bit of a plan, and then getting in front of the communities that are willing and interested as soon as you can. I don't think there's any too early necessarily. It's just about whether a community is prepared to have those conversations.
You would have seen some of the pictures. You're in New Zealand now. Mm-hmm. Are there areas that you have noted where you think, wow, retreat is absolutely necessary there?
So I haven't really sort of looked at it from that lens. I probably came here more for some other reasons, but in my experience, any time you have a situation where people's lives are in danger, in particular, you're having to do rescues and people could potentially be traumatized for life for these sorts of things. I think it's something that is good to consider. In the case of Grantham, we had a significant loss of life. We had people being pulled off of roofs with helicopters and probably some similar situations to what New Zealand's experienced over the past few weeks. In those cases, when people can be heavily traumatized, I think those are situations where communities might want to look into the relocation. That was certainly the case in Grantham, that the community really stepped up and wanted to be a part of this before we really had a plan in place.
Looking at Grantham, I think it was interesting because obviously community members were offered an opportunity to rebuild on higher land, on higher ground, and there was land available. Some of the areas that have been hit in New Zealand are very unique coastal communities, or they're highly productive horticultural land, and there's not necessarily a like for like. So how do you get around that?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question. I think there's not a one size fits all. There's always a case of how does this community want to respond, and what things do they need to get them through it. So in the case of Grantham, we didn't have the answers when the disaster hit. We didn't have a plan. So if you asked me in the days and weeks after Grantham, how are you going to do this? I wouldn't have had an answer for you. But what you do is you find those opportunities. You find those opportunities that can move the community forward. So there was land in Grantham. We identified it and we went ahead with it. Other communities may not necessarily have land available that's suitable, but there might be other options available to them. And those are the kind of things that you've really got to get in the weeds and really talk to the community. You know, that's the most important element, is listening to what they have to say, because they've been living there for a long time and they may know things that you can't pull off of Google Maps. You know, you've got to be responsive to their needs.
I looked at your timeline and I think you'd rebuilt within a year, but the actual land swap, that was offered up within months of the disaster, right? Somewhere like 4 months. That's a fast turnaround time.
Yes, yeah. We had our first ballot to allocate land about 6 months after the flood. And we had workshops with the community to master plan the new site within about just over 2 months after the flood. So one thing that we recognized is communities that are willing, they will do anything to move forward. And we would book master planning workshops and community workshops. You know, we would do 3 of them in a week because that's what the community wanted. They wanted to move forward. They wanted to step through. And when you have a community like that and you have leadership up the top, the mayor out in Grantham was a very strong leader, and that was Steve Jones. And when you have those elements that are so important, you can move very, very quickly. But you need to be able to respond to that community. So you need to be able to understand what they need, and then you need to deliver.
So who pays, and where is the line between personal responsibility and the collective bearing the cost?
In terms of who pays, I think we've got to get to a point where we realize, you know, everybody pays for it anyways, regardless of the response that you choose. Managed retreat just sort of forward, brings that cost forward. And that was how we sold it to our levels of government in Grantham, is that, well, do you want to keep pulling people off of roofs with helicopters? Because that gets very costly and it's not good for a community. So that's how we weighed it up. And I think in the years since, Grantham has flooded a number of times, but the response there has been minimal because we've dealt with the issue.
Hey, Jamie, before you go, how many calls have you had from New Zealand mayors or government officials or councils wanting to have a chat to you?
Yeah,
Here
well,
in New
it's
Zealand?
interesting. Yeah, I had planned this trip before Christmas, and I wasn't expecting to talk too much about managed retreat, but there's been a lot of meetings that have popped up in the short time that I've been here. Since I've only been here for a few days, but since the cyclone, there was certainly a lot more interest. So, and I'm happy to talk to anybody at any time about my experience, and if it can help communities anywhere in New Zealand, I'm happy to have that chat.
Environmental engineer Jamie Simmons. The company that operates Mount Ruapehu ski slopes has announced it will sell season passes for 2023, despite being in voluntary administration. Ruapehu Alpine Lifts made the call during a period of uncertainty for the region, including the abrupt closure of Chateau Tongariro last month. Our reporter Jimmy Allingham has more.
RAL Administrator John Fisk is hopeful that after years of COVID and weather disruption, the ski season on Mount Ruapehu will be a success.
We're very hopeful that that will be the case, and all the work that we've been doing to date has been to prepare for that. We're very grateful that we've had funding from government and from the ANZ Bank to enable work to be done during the summer that prepares the mountain for the winter season.
RAL received $10 million from the government, but Mr Fisk says there's no plan to ask for more. The administrators are still working through the situation for Life Pass holders. Season passes will be available within weeks, with both Turoa and Whakapapa operating.
We've looked at slightly modifying the lift arrangement on the Turoa side of the mountain, but there will still be access to over 1,000 hectares of free ride terrain.
Mr Fisk says RAL's future will become clearer following a meeting in May with creditors.
I'm incredibly optimistic about it. I think there's a lot of goodwill out there to support this. I don't think the government would have funded us unless they recognised that this was really an important thing as well.
In Hoakune, TCB ski board and bike salesman James Bell says news of season pass sales gives the town a much needed boost. But he says the season may look a little different.
From
from what I've seen from RAL, it just might not be the systems or, the people are used to. But we are all, as a community, elated and excited to be seeing some progress.
Chairperson of the Future of Hauakune project, Christine Hickman, says the group wants the council to bring forward a $2 million revitalisation project.
The way that we feel at the moment is that Auckland needs the focus and commitment of our local council to bring it up to the level of quality that you see in other parts of the country.
Mrs Hickman and Mr Bell say the region has diversified into a summer hotspot as local bike trails prove popular, but it took a blow with the sudden closure of the chateau. While Ruapehu Mayor Weston Curtin is welcoming news of the ski season passes, he acknowledges the unsettling effect RAL's troubles and the chateau's closure have brought.
People are anxious, waiting with interest to see what's happening, quite angry the fact that it's closed without any sort of recognition of pride that people had in previous years. People going there, knocking on the door saying, I had my wedding there or honeymoon there and wanting to take a last photo. And from what I understand, they've been denied of that access.
It's about to be transferred into the Department of Conservation's hands as 30-year leaseholder Car Corporation exits the building. Doc's Tongariro District Operations Manager George Taylor says he can't yet give a timeline about its future.
There are lots of things to manage and it'll take a lot of time to work through them. And we've not yet considered any longer-term future for the chateau. It's too early to say.
He confirmed Doc has received inquiries from interested parties and will move as quickly as possible.
We're doing as much as we can to understand what the future options will be for the chateau, knowing that time is of the essence.
A positive outlook for skiers and snowboarders, but the shutters could stay down a while at the chateau.
And that was Jimmy Ellingham reporting. A text message in here from someone who's distraught in the Napier area affected by the cyclone. They've got a message from their energy provider congratulating them on using less power during the past 2 weeks. True, they say, automated, I suppose, but it contains a graph showing a flat line, then a peak on Sunday afternoon. The data fragile power link was reinstated to a cluster of houses by Unison after 13 days from being wiped out by Cyclone Gabrielle. Then the message goes on with ways to conserve power, like wash using cold water. They are appalled by the fact that the message has been sent out. On the subject of extreme weather and climate change, we'll have more on the climate march around the country after 6.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. Thousands of rangatahi have taken to the streets today throughout the country, demanding immediate action on climate change in the school strike for climate. In Christchurch, protesters have breached the doors of their city council offices and are staging a sit-in. Initially, about 500 people braved steady rain outside the building to protest. As well as fast action on climate change, School Strike for Climate New Zealand's demands include support for regenerative farming, e-bike rebates for low-income families, 30% marine protection by 2025 and no new exploration or mining of fossil fuel resources. In Wellington, more than 1,000 people of all ages marched down Lambton Quay before gathering at Parliament. Student Brianna was among them. She told RNZ it was important to protest for a better future.
Most people in the older generations assume we do it. Well, I've heard a lot of people say you're just doing this to get out of going to classes. Yeah, it's because we have to grow up with this. This is our future that we're trying to protest for in our planet. Yeah. We don't have another option.
School Strike for Climate's 5 demands to the government today include lowering the voting age to 16. In Nelson, protesters demanded decision makers take climate change seriously. Garran College student Nate Wilborn says teenagers have many concerns about the environment.
Climate denial is probably one of the biggest things. People that still don't believe. Even for Maureen Pugh, a couple of weeks ago, talking about how she doesn't believe that climate change is caused by mankind as we speak. It's actually disheartening, and I just think it's such a shame that people still don't believe that it's us that are causing it and it's us that has to solve it.
Nate Wilborn says climate strikers want to see real commitment to achieve climate goals from policy and decision makers. The group marched down Trafalgar Street to the council to present a letter calling for free public transport. The government is investing more than $3 million to expand existing mental health support in Hawke's Bay. The money will boost walk-in mental wellbeing services in general practice and expand the All Sorts mental wellbeing campaign. Health Minister Aisha Verrill says a team of mental health workers are being brought in to offer local support to those most impacted by the cyclone. The Māori Health Authority, Te Aka Whai Ora, is also designing a response to support Te Ao Māori mental wellbeing solutions. Free telehealth and digital services will be funded for those unable to travel to get mental health support. Some West Coast beaches like Karikari may not be accessible to the public for more than a year. Auckland Transport Chief Engineer Murray Burt told Checkpoint they are urging the general public to stay away from the beaches of Karikari, Piha and Muriwai as roads are still delicate. He says it could be more than a year before they get things back to the way they were on roads like Lone Kauri Road at Karikari. However, there will be single-lane access on damaged roads for Karikari residents in about 2 weeks. And the so-called elevation slip on Scenic Drive has been reopened to a single lane for light traffic, which will help the Piha community. The ACT Party has announced a bundle of policies it says will help flood-affected regions bounce back faster. Its leader, David Seymour, says the recovery and rebuild from the January storm and Cyclone Gabrielle will be expensive. He's proposing a special economic zone for Hawke's Bay and Tairāwhiti, making it easier to access finance and rebuild in the region. ACT also wants migrants who want to work in the zone to get fast-tracked visas and a tougher approach to criminal offences during natural disasters. Chaotic scenes have broken out in the Georgian Parliament during a hearing about a controversial bill. The bill would allow the government to designate media outlets and civil society groups as foreign agents. The BBC's Rayan Dimitri reports.
Scuffles broke out in the chamber between opposition and pro-government MPs. Tables were turned upside down and some opposition deputies were thrown out of the Parliament building. The controversial bill would label as foreign agents Georgian media outlets and non-governmental organizations that receive at least 20% of their funding from abroad. It has been proposed by the openly anti-Western People's Power movement, which is closely affiliated with the governing party.
In sport, sprinter Zoe Hobbs has broken the 11-second barrier for the first time in her career, but it won't be recorded as she had a tailwind at the New Zealand Track and Field Champs in Wellington. She won the final of the 100 metres, clocking a sensational 10.89 seconds. She broke her own New Zealand 100 metres record and Oceania record during her heat this morning with a time of 11.07 seconds. She also banked an automatic entry standard time for the 2023 World Athletics Championships thanks to her time in the heat. That's the news.
This week on Music 101, we bring you Finn Andrews talking us through the Veil's new album. A live session with Greg Johnson.
And then you realise that you've had love in your hands and let it go. Hold tight.
Lots of new music and vinyl giveaways. Fashion designer Kate Sylvester picks her favourite songs and talks 30 years of design on the mixtape. All this Saturday afternoon with me, Charlotte Ryan, from 1 p.m. here on RNZ National.
Funded through New Zealand On Air. Back to Lisa Owen after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Saturday. For Northland to Waitomo, including the Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Partly cloudy, isolated showers this afternoon in Northland. Taranaki to Vanuatu, including the Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine, apart from scattered afternoon and evening showers and possible thunderstorms. Wairarapa, fine today, periods of rain developing in the morning, easing in the evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, cloudy periods, rain developing tonight, easing to showers tomorrow afternoon. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain clearing to fine from the south tonight. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered showers about Canterbury, spreading elsewhere this afternoon, some heavy with possible thunderstorms until tonight. Showers turning to rain in Canterbury tomorrow afternoon. Otago and Southland, scattered showers spreading north this afternoon and evening, some possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with light showers possible. It's 6 past 6.
Nā mihi Karen, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Thousands of students have ditched the classroom today for a nationwide climate protest. They're demanding immediate action from the government on climate change and say the country's recent flooding and cyclone are a huge wake-up call. In Christchurch, young activists have breached the doors of the City Council offices and are staging a sit-in. We'll go there in a moment, but first, this from reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi.
Hundreds of people gathered outside Britomart Station in Tamaki Makaurau this afternoon, many of them students, but people of all ages were there to take to the streets. Many carrying signs that read, "Our streets flood, so we flood the streets. System change, not climate change, and people, not profit." Organiser Xavier Walsh says the country's recent extreme weather events are proof we need to act now.
Is seeing the climate catastrophe on our own shores with our very eyes. So many of our friends in whānau were affected so dramatically by flooding. You know, people lost their homes and their entire livelihoods. This is climate change, and so we need to ensure we have climate justice.
Student President at Massey University, Jake Law, is echoing this call.
I'm hoping government will start taking it more seriously than they are, and I think that needs to happen structurally through the government, through policy, through the way we fund, the way we resource. I'd also be keen for big corporations to take more responsibility for the damage they do to our environment.
Take your rubbish up. Make sure this earth is clean. Climate is here today. It isn't here tomorrow. Stand proud. Stand tall.
Today, protesters had a list of concerns they'd like addressed.
Students are asking for an end to fossil fuel use, to double our marine reserves by 2025 and to establish a regenerative farming fund for farmers, along with e-bike rebates for lower income households.
We're gonna move now. In Auckland, students marched from Britomart Station, stopping along the way at BP, Fonterra and Air New Zealand before ending up at Victoria Park. Emotions were running high as people showed up to fight for their planet.
We need to stand up for what's right and encourage more people, especially young people, who should be fighting for this cause because it's so important. And yeah, I think the turnout's been great, but it could always be greater. And we just want more people to be involved in this cause because it is our future that we're fighting about.
That's kind of fully into our generation's hands, and it's just something that, like, if we don't act on now, it's just going to increase further.
No more! Keep your carbon in the soil!
In Wellington, students marched to the steps of Parliament to deliver their message directly.
I feel like the facts are in their face. The students, the people, everyone is telling them what needs to be done. If the response for COVID can happen this quick, surely the response for a worldwide disaster, a natural breakdown, can happen too. It's really important that we hold our leaders to account.
With some of those leaders present today, students are hoping to finally be heard.
If you were listening to that report by Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi, we'll put the video version on our webpage. Now, in Christchurch, young activists have breached the doors of the City Council offices and are staging a sit-in, and reporter Anna Sargent is there. Kia ora, Anna, what is happening?
Kia ora. Well, there's still a lot of people here at the council. They were speaking with Christchurch Mayor Phil Major just before and airing their various concerns to him. And at the moment, I spoke to one of the organisers of the march who said that they are hanging around till after the 6 o'clock news, and they might be there for another hour or so.
And what are they actually doing? Whereabouts are they in the building?
So they're just through the front entrance, up the stairs, in the main area, and they're just occupying the area, spread out. There's music playing, a bit of an occasion, and they're all very energetic and passionate about what they're talking about.
And what did the mayor say to them?
Yeah, so one of the main concerns they were airing was about the plans for the new international airport in central Otago, in the town of Terrace, which they were saying was unsustainable, and the council's support for that they very much disagreed with and wanted change to happen there. So they were sort of taking turns talking about that and also airing other concerns. Another topic that was coming up was about bus routes in Christchurch and encouraging that, and Phil was responding to them, and they were sort of having a conversation about that.
Anna, I've seen some of the photos I think you took, and there are police in those pictures. How much of a police presence and what are they doing?
Yes, no, there are several police sort of stationed around the building. At the moment, they don't seem to be doing much. They're just waiting on standby, but it's a pretty relaxed environment at the moment. So I wouldn't say that they're needed in much capacity at the moment.
And also, had the council closed up for the day? I mean, how did these protesters actually get in?
Yeah, so one of the organisers I spoke to, she said that this was planned from the start of the day, and this is the first time they've done this as part of the Climate Change Schools March. So they had always planned to, storm the council building, and as far as how they managed it, I'm not entirely sure, but it was planned from the start, so they were all ready and prepared, so it wasn't a spontaneous thing.
Appreciate that, Anna. Thank you. Anna Sargent, who is near the Christchurch City Council offices there, where some of the young activists, climate change activists, are staging a sit-in. Kumara growers are facing a double whammy, covering the cost of harvesting already rotten crops and the risk any salvaged veg could go the same way. The exact losses across the industry aren't known yet, but some estimate 90% plus of kumara could be ruined after being soaked for days in lakes of rainwater. The harvest season's just getting underway, but some growers can already see and smell what's going on underneath the soil. And then there's the problem of fixing the soil too, with it flushed of nutrients. Warwick Simpson grows kumara in Ruapehu, south of Dargaville. He's lost at least 30% of his crop, probably more, and that's going to mean a talk with the bank.
Kumara growers here, we've had a pretty rough time. The initial problem was the planting season was really wet, so we only got about 70% of the usual area planted to start with. And then the cyclone hit, and obviously that caused lots of flooding. Some growers reported their crops being under a metre of water at times, and a lot of it took a long time to go away. So some of our crops have been underwater for 5 days. And obviously you can imagine that kumara doesn't survive that very well.
Yeah, so tell us about your particular patch. What's happened with your crop?
So it all flooded it a little bit, at least to varying degrees. Some of it had that 5 days underwater, and that part is dead and gone. That's about a third of my crop. The other 2/3 experienced some flooding. It's all still alive. The big part is we won't really find out the damage until we start harvesting and see how many have rotted underneath and how many are good.
Is there any idea, have you got any idea overall how much of the kumara crop has been destroyed?
I've heard a number of estimates, all sitting between 50% and right up to 95%. It's really hard to say in terms of final yield what that value will be, because even once we've harvested it, we are expecting maybe a third of it to rot in storage as well. We've sort of found out that the result of flooding can cause that. So, yeah,
you mean it starts to disintegrate even once you bring it above ground?
Yeah, so you harvest it, that looks good, and then you put it in the storage shed, and then just over that time it starts to rot, and obviously lose the ability to sell it at that point.
So it's really up in the air for you. I mean, how do you plan ahead, not knowing how much of a crop you've got and what your income's going to be?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. Just knowing the definite loss is already quite a hard hit. It's going to be a definite struggle to get going again for next season, because when you want to start planting again in October, normally that's funded by the income of the previous crop, but obviously that's going to be quite a lot down now.
What kind of figures are you working on, Warwick, in terms of how much of that income do you think you've lost?
Well, a third of my usual income will be gone from that, and then it's sort of a guessing game for the rest. I sort of, if you sort of guess that 50% of the remainder might be lost as well. So that's a massive part of my income. Definitely going to have to borrow and talk to banks or other sources to get money to keep going next year.
What about workers who would normally help you out with harvest and things like that? Have they still got jobs?
Well, growers will generally have some permanent staff. So they've, I think in general, mine certainly do still have their jobs. We also use casual workers for the peak periods of the season. So harvesting is one of those peak periods where we get a lot of extra people in. So some growers with less crop to be harvested will be needing less workers, but there's still plenty of work around. There are other growers that have only had minor impacts, so they can certainly use workers. There are some other issues as well, dealing with RSC workers, which of those have come over from Vanuatu to work in our industry. How they can be redistributed and things like that is another complication that's being sorted out.
People always wonder about insurance. Can you insure your crop?
No, I have checked several years ago and asked if I could insure it, and the response was no, and even if I could, it would be far too expensive to do that. So, yeah, pretty clear that no grower will have their crop insured.
So, how do you feel about how you're all feeling at the moment? Because it's, it's depressing, to be frank, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely some growers having a hard time at the moment. We are coming together as an industry. We've got our Northern Wairau Vegetable Growers Association is doing a lot of work supporting growers, getting the information to take further up, and then we're getting a lot of support from Vegetables New Zealand and Horticulture New Zealand, and they're interfacing with the Ministry for Primary Industries to try and sort out that financial support and other support as well. Also got to mention Rural Support Trust has been a really big help. They're sorting out all kinds of things, really. Their Task Force Green is coming into play. They're sorting out lunches and dinners so that growers can talk to each other and getting that social aspect back into our lives, sort of a bit of commiseration going on there. But there's lots of really good things trying to get growers back into a good space, basically.
And that's Kumara grower Warwick Simpson there. It is 19 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. The number of dead in the Greek train crash has increased to 57. Rail workers have staged a one-day strike, blaming the accident on government neglect. More than 2,000 people have protested for a second day, shocked by Tuesday's disaster near the city of Larissa. The BBC's Nick Beak reports.
The aftermath of Greece's worst ever rail disaster. A station master in a nearby city has now been charged with manslaughter by negligence. And already the country's Prime Minister says tragic human error was to blame. But that has sparked anger overnight, including in the capital Athens, because for years there have been warnings the rail network was not safe. This surgeon, who came out of retirement to help the injured, says the many young lives lost were the victims of systemic failings.
It's a disaster, it's a catastrophic thing. Families are crying tonight. Unfortunately, the majority of the wounded, of the lost people are young students. They left home happy after the long weekend to go for their studies, to see their relatives, and never reached their case.
This is one of the hospitals where survivors and the injured have been treated. It's also where some family members have been coming to give their DNA in the hope that maybe any sort of samples that are recovered from the scene today will be matched to their loved ones who are still missing.
The force of the explosions were captured on camera, 2 fireballs ripping through the carriages. Visiting the wreckage, Greece's transport minister became emotional as he talked about the country's failing train network and later resigned. It's not known exactly how many passengers are missing, but many families now face an agonising wait.
Experts are warning that North Korea is facing food shortages bordering on famine. Leader Kim Jong-un now says he wants the state to take control of farming. CNN's Paula Hancock reports.
Concerns about North Korea's food crisis are growing. Reports from multiple sources say deaths due to starvation are likely.
Probably its worst point since the famine in the 1990s, which killed 3 to 5% of the population.
Attention's being paid at the very top. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un held a Workers' Party meeting this week, calling for a fundamental change in farming and state economic plans. But many say it is his regime, its chronic mismanagement and isolation that has caused this crisis.
We're really talking about 3 years of no imports of fertilizer. There's been no imports of tools or components to fix the outdated machinery that they have.
An extensive shutdown of borders due to the COVID pandemic meant almost no food or aid was getting into the country. Only in recent months has minimal trade restarted with China. South Korean officials said last month they believe deaths from starvation are occurring in certain areas, though provided no evidence. Its Rural Development Agency estimates that the North's food production dropped almost 4% last year from the year before.
Food has dipped below the amount needed to satisfy the minimum human needs. So as it stands, by that measure, even if you distributed food perfectly equally, which is totally inconceivable, you would have hunger-related deaths.
Speaking to South Korea's foreign minister last week, he said Pyongyang has to decide to help its own people.
The only way that North Korea can get out of this trouble is to come back to the dialogue table and accept our humanitarian offer to the North and make a better choice for the future.
The regime's focus remains on its nuclear and missile program. Seoul's Ministry of Unification says if Pyongyang had used the money spent on launching missiles last year for food, it could have bought 1 million tonnes, more than enough to cover the annual food shortage. But that focus is unlikely to shift.
As the time goes on, the capacity for North Koreans to endure hardship becomes harder and harder. Their resilience, runs off, and their resources also decrease.
In Britain, the head of MI5 has made an unprecedented apology for its failure to prevent the suicide bombing at an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester. An official report found that the attack in 2017 that killed 22 people might have been avoided if intelligence officers had acted more promptly on information they'd received. The report said that MI5 had concerns about the Libyan man, Salman Abedi, but those were not discussed or immediately written up. The BBC's Judith Moritz reports.
Only Salman Abedi detonated the bomb, which killed 22 people at Manchester Arena, but others bear responsibility. Those who radicalised him, helped him make the device, and the agencies who failed to stop him. The Manchester Arena inquiry report spells it out starkly. MI5 let Abedi slip through the net.
I have found a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. There was a realistic possibility that actionable intelligence could have been obtained, which might have led to action preventing the attack. The reasons for this missed opportunity included a failure by the security service, in my view, to act swiftly enough.
Abedi set off his suicide bomb in the foyer at the end of an Ariana Grande concert. Teenagers were leaving, parents were waiting for their children. The youngest to die was just 8 years old. For the families of those who were murdered, the report's findings are hard to take.
All we as families have asked for from day one is the truth. Acknowledgement of failures. Hopefully next time there won't be as many families going through the utter heartbreak we have had to endure for the last 5 years, 9 months, 1 week and 1 day. Forgiveness will never be an option for such evil intentions, and those that played any part in the murder of our children will never ever get forgiveness. From top to bottom, MI5 to the associates of the attacker. We will always believe that you all played a part in the murder of our children.
Tonight, MI5 has said it's profoundly sorry that the security service did not prevent the arena attack. This is Didsbury Mosque, where the Abedis worshipped. The report found that leaders here were willfully blind to extremist activity on the premises. Its chairman was described as an unreliable witness who downplayed the links between the Abedis and the mosque, something he continued to deny outside court today.
I can tell you here and now, there is no place for radicalisation or politics or any evil acts. No one can be radicalised with a 10-minute sermon.
But this is about political meetings, about other activities in the mosque.
I repeat again, and I hope you will have it on. There are no political meetings. I do not care what people say.
The inquiry said there were political meetings.
Of course they would say. Have they been to the mosque? Have they been in 2016, 2017? They heard what they were told. So people would sometimes lie.
They heard evidence from one of your imams who was said to be reliable.
That imam, and I stood in the court and I said, that imam is a liar. Many things he did were not correct. I do not care what he said, but I will tell you, he lied.
And you did not turn a blind eye, you say?
And we did not turn a blind eye.
The report found that Salman Abedi's father, Ramadan, holds significant responsibility for radicalising his sons. Ismail, BBC News. Can I ask you a few questions, please, Ismail? It's BBC News. And there was heavy criticism of the eldest Abedi brother, Ismail, who fled the country in defiance of a court order to appear at the inquiry. The report found that MI5 and counter-terrorism police each failed to share intelligence. That's something that both organisations say has improved since, allowing our cameras inside their joint operations centre to illustrate the way they work together. This is the first time that journalists have been allowed inside this building, and the obviously tight security prevents us from filming much of what goes on here. But this place is being held up as an example of positive change. It was built in direct response to the Manchester Arena bombing and the other terror attacks which happened that year.
In 5 years since this incident happened, there's already been an internal inquiry by MI5 and 104 recommendations were made. 102 have already been put in place. The last 2 are being put in place as we speak. And there are no doubt many more changes that are going to be needed from the reports that Sir John has written. And I will be making absolutely sure that they are put in place as well.
The arena bombing was Manchester's darkest day. Tonight, its mayor said the country was simply not prepared for a terror attack like it to happen here, and that the inquiry's findings must be used both to protect and respond better in future.
We are almost out of time. I'm going to give the last word to Paul, who's got in touch to say those climate change protesters give me the thinnest sliver of hope for future generations. The late news team will be here to keep you up to date throughout the evening. And don't forget, if you missed anything from the program, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast from. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you back on Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Todd Zahner. Thousands of rangatahi have taken to the streets today throughout the country demanding immediate action on climate change in the latest school strike for climate. Christchurch Mayor Phil Major has met with climate protesters who are staging a sit-in at the City Council buildings. A ballot's being held tomorrow to decide whether 30,000 principals and teachers will strike. And some Northland Kumara growers say nearly 95% of their crop could be ruined after Cyclone Gabrielle. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Country Life this week, a Waitomo farmer on a quest to protect what was once lost.
Our intentions would continue on in perpetuity, which is rather lovely.
Caves entombing moa are a window to the past.
This is the interesting thing just here.
Holy moly.
This is a big moa, and that one's died in here and is calcified into the formation.
Country Life, Friday night and Saturday morning after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
29 minutes to 7, time for Trending Now, and I'm Todd Zahner. We start with focus on politics. Today we line up the plans from Labour and now National to reform New Zealand's water services.
The billboards read repeal and replace, National's stake in the ground over the Three Waters plan. Repeal and replace. But replace it with what? This week, at last, Nationals leader Christopher Luxon revealed his party's alternative vision.
Today, I am pleased to announce that National's local water done well plan is the way forward.
Kia ora, I'm Craig McCulloch. Welcome to Focus on Politics. National debuted its policy at its annual Blue Greens Forum, a gathering of members and MPs with an interest in the environment and conservation. It was held in the shadow of Cyclone Gabrielle, its devastation still fresh, East Coasters and others still picking up the pieces.
Cyclone Gabrielle has only reinforced to us as New Zealanders that infrastructure is not something that we can all ignore and assume that it's okay, because it isn't.
Basically, everyone agrees there's a need for change. For decades, councils have neglected to adequately invest in water infrastructure, hence the bursting pipes and spilled sewage. The bill to fix it will be enormous. The two parties dispute just how much it will cost, but think billions.
Reform is necessary, even though Labour, I think, has given it a bad name.
National's plan begins with the repeal component of repeal and replace. Very simply, National would scrap Labour's plan. A quick reminder, Labour's proposal is currently under review and highly likely to change, but in its existing form it would take control of water away from councils and give it instead to 4 new mega entities, each responsible for a different part of the country. They would then borrow the funds required to bring infrastructure up to scratch. The thinking goes the new entities would be large enough and far enough removed from the councils that they could borrow more and at a cheaper rate than the councils could alone. The mega entities would be governed by boards, which would be appointed by regional groups with a 50-50 split of iwi and council representatives. That's the model you'll know as co-governance. Under National, all that's gone.
Labour's Three Waters scheme, I think, is completely wrong. The public do not, they will not, and they should not trust Labour on water policy again. The public do not want Labour's centralised and undemocratic asset grab, where 4 mega entities take control of the assets that have been built up and paid for by generations of local ratepayers.
Instead, National would leave control with the councils, but require them to invest in their pipes and to ring-fence revenue for doing so. A new regulator in hand with the government would monitor and sign off on councils' proposals to ensure they met water quality standards and were financially sustainable. How they achieved that would be up to them.
Unlike Labour, we won't tell councils how to do it, but we'll empower councils to provide solutions that fit their communities and deliver our outcomes.
The options, though, are fairly limited. Councils could put up rates or water charges, except the increases required would be eye-watering. They could borrow more themselves, except many are already near their debt limits. Or, and this seems to be National's preferred option, they could team up and form regional organisations similar to Wellington Water. Those amalgamations could then borrow separately from the councils that own them. Same idea as with Labour's 4 mega entities. They could borrow more, and they could borrow more cheaply.
And if councils can't produce sustainable plans, the government will be able to step in, but we anticipate that being a last resort.
What stepping in looks like isn't exactly clear, but it's possible the Minister for Local Government could install commissioners where necessary. The plan seems to have gone down well with many councils, particularly those which were opposed to the government's idea. Communities for Local Democracy, which represents 30 councils, has given its backing. The Tararua Mayor, Tracy Collis, says National's proposal empowers councils to find the best solutions for them.
Without that local voice, when you're put into a large entity, how do you balance those priorities with your smaller rural communities? The devil's always in the detail. Where was our voice in that?
But the greater the local voice and local control, the greater the uncertainty too. National's policy has little in the way of costings, partly because until the councils have come up with their plans, it's impossible to know what they will cost and what that will in turn mean for rates. It raises questions. Would, for example, the smaller merged entities under National's plan be able to borrow as cheaply as Labour's mega ones? And why would councils which have managed their assets well voluntarily agree to team up with those which have not, and could leave the councils most in need of help out on their own? A fear outlined here by the Bulla Mayor, Jamie Klein.
Certainly during the Three Waters process, the councils on the West Coast
commissioned some work to look at what it would look like for all of the West Coast, for instance, to form, a water services entity of our own, and it fell fairly well short of still being affordable for ratepayers. So, then when you look at the idea of potentially joining further afield with Canterbury, it would seem a pretty tall ask for the ratepayers of Canterbury to voluntarily want to take on the West Coast or Buller. So again, there'd be a lot to work through. But those concerns are very real, and somebody still has to pay, and ultimately it'll be ratepayers.
National has signalled there could be some limited one-off funding available to help in such situations, but the details are sketchy there too. The economics and politics journalist Bernard Hickey is critical of both National and Labour's policies, calling them a form of magical thinking. He sat down with RNZ's political editor, Jane Patterson.
Well, National have taken out the really difficult political bits and essentially pushed the hard stuff back down to the council without actually giving them much help and not really solving the basic problem that both National and Labour have, which is that neither National or Labour's version of central government would help councils much with this massive infrastructure financing problem we've got, not just in the future, but to catch up on the $100 billion that we haven't invested in the past. Three Waters was an attempt to try to solve that problem by taking those assets, so-called off the balance sheet, somewhere into a grey area between the government and the councils, where the tough political decisions about water charges and about higher debt was somehow disconnected from the political pain at central and local government level. That was Labour's attempt to try to avoid the pain. National's attempt to avoid the pain is simply just to flick past it right back down to the councils.
Is that one advantage then, if you're looking at it from the financial point of view, not necessarily from a taxpayer's point of view perhaps because it's a lot of money, but from the councils in terms of getting that multi-billion-dollar investment as part of the proposal?
Yeah, the councils obviously are in different positions depending on where they are and how much growth they've got or how much they've underinvested in the past. Some councils are in a good position. They've done a lot of investment. They've got the water charges in. They don't have a problem to solve. Auckland, for example, has water care. It has charges. And, one of the options National has put forward is that it has suggested to councils that they voluntarily get together. And that was its position when it was last in power. But of course, by the end of that, it had tried to prompt, nag, prod the councils together. And the councils usually go, yeah, nah. And any attempts to get that voted through have failed. So things need to be pushed forward. National don't want to do it because it's politically difficult. Labour have tried to do it through Three Waters, which was essentially to create an apolitical vehicle in the middle, and unfortunately for Labour got bound up in this reaction, quite visceral reaction against co-governance.
Coming back to councils working together as is part of National's proposal, do you run into problems with cross-subsidisation? So, for example, one council who has made the investment